a couple of minutes late coming on. You know how it is. We're just dealing with the technology. Thank you so much for joining us on this Tuesday. My name is Candy Palmater, and I'm here to welcome you to this, the second session in Bringing Our Children Home, reflecting on our shared history. I am joining you from the unceded territory of the Mississauga of the Credit, the Wabanaki Wabanaki, I'm thinking about home, the Haudenosaunee and the Wendat people. I'm in Greater Toronto area, but I am Mi'kmaq from the East Coast, Ilribar First Nation specifically. And it's my pleasure to be your cruise director for this evening's festivities. This is the second in an 8-week series. We will be getting together every Saturday and every Tuesday for these. This is something that Reconciliation Canada put together on the fly, a much needed response to what has been happening. We're just waiting for a couple of people to join us. And as we wait for them to join us, I just want to kind of set the mood by talking to you for a moment about the notion of, right now all across the country, regardless of where you are, it seems that there is a message being sent your way. And I see that we do have Vanessa here to do the opening song. So I'm going to go to the song and then we'll come back to what I was just going to say. So Vanessa, without any further ado, can you unmute yourself and start us off with a song, please?
Hi, everyone. I'll just start by introducing myself a little bit. My name is Vanessa Parnell. I come from the Haida, Tsimshian, and Nisga'a nations. I'd also like to acknowledge that I'm singing this song on the beautiful unceded territory of the Squamish, Musqueam, and Tsleil-Waututh people. This song is a prayer song. It's composed by my mom, Christine Smith Martin. You'll hear the word Hugwilyan in this song, and that means to walk softly on your journey. So without further ado, I'll get started. I'm just gonna get my drumstick out here. Okay. Ahua, ahu, ahu, Haguyan, ahu, ahu, 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 Thank you.
Thank you, Vanessa, for that beautiful song and for starting us off. And I love your orange t-shirt. Very appropriate. Thank you so much for that. I now will turn the camera over to the esteemed Chief Robert Joseph to give us an opening prayer.
Greetings, all my relatives. Nimut. We are all one. Welcome to this gathering today. It's a beautiful and bittersweet gathering to remember our little children who never got to return home. Little ones who were buried in unmarked graves so disrespectfully. And I keep thinking about them and wondering how they must have felt being left there all these years. And now here we are, welcoming the discovery of those little ones and turning to our inner strength to find ways to honor them, to memorialize them, and for Canada to learn from them. We've heard their little voices now. They've been calling for a very long time. And in that calling, in their voices now clear and evident, all of us, all of the people who live on Turtle Island are asked to do something, to do what those little children desired in their time, a good life, a better place, to be valued, to be cuddled, to be loved, to be cared for, to be respected and honored at all times. And so in this gathering, bringing our children home, reflecting on our journey, I want all of us to think very deeply about what our responsibilities are now, so that when we move from this moment, from this gathering, we will in our own lives seek to bring about the conditions that those little ones didn't have the opportunity to celebrate, to experience. So I'm going to pray to the Creator that He be present in our deliberations, that He be present with all of you listening to this gathering, so that we might hear what we need to hear, so that we may discover a direction that we need to go, and then find the energy and love to pursue all that is needed to bring about peace to those little ones, and peace for us in our time, those of us who are left behind. Want again nog niet nog ik wel als nog wel staat. Dat alle. En is dan nog dat alles jullie kwillen nukus. Gas kakabala o sachida sas meneer te lakio kuda. Is ik iets zo. So we that na kwakela la fokta excellent clickers residential school. Kiwala la kada pakam lokwatli. Kan de klok maar se alle gede ik ga sa. Kono klitli dola kire la fokta ma masa. Mooi ziki geklemon het mas se het ma was dat gewoon wacht die daar wachten. All my relations. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that beautiful prayer of opening. I now want to invite Karen Joseph to give us some few words to open this. Particular event. Oh, there she is. There she is.
Hello. Thank you for that, Chief Joseph. It's been, sorry. I'm really glad that everybody's joined us today and that we have this opportunity to further some of the discussions that are going on. We've met now for the first time really to go through kind of a mourning process when we first heard about the children. And then in the next session, what we were trying to do was to have a call to action to everybody, that we needed to have a mental health response that was going to move across the nation, that recognized some of the challenges that people were having as a result of the revelation of these children. And so this is the next part of that series, which really is all about how did we get here? I think there are a lot of people across the country who don't necessarily have that background knowledge about how this could even possibly happen. How could we find ourselves in this situation in this country when we hold the values and we see ourselves in the way that we do globally and also within our own country? And this is especially true as we're coming upon what is normally called Canada Day here. And it's caused a lot of challenges across this country. And so it's brought up a lot of dialogue. And so I think the kind of conversations we're going to be having here today are really important for that. And I also think that, you know, there's going to be some important calls to action, just like there were on the first ones. And we'll continue to do that as we go through this series. And I wanted to really acknowledge and thank everybody who's put so much time and effort and who's been able to join us for all of these times, including Candy and Vanessa and Andrea and Tara Lynn and all of the rest of our team and that have come to join us today. So thank you all for being here, and I look forward to the next pieces of where we're going. Yala Kesla.
Thank you so much for that, Karen. Thank you so much for that, Karen. Karen was driving until seconds ago and just got pulled over. You see the background is kind of was kind of blurry there, but I do believe we were inside of her car with her. My name is Candy Palmater. As I said at the top, I will be hosting this series as we roll out over the next 8 weeks. And I wanted to say a few words before we get going into the larger conversation. I reflected on when we met on Saturday, and Chief Robert had an incredible thing that he said, you know, a beloved man, loved from coast to coast to coast in this country. And he talked about the fact that he could not love himself throughout most of his life. And I fear that that is an epidemic problem at this point, maybe as serious as the pandemic that's happening. It seems to me that there is almost like a conspiracy that all day, every single day, no matter where you are, whether you're looking at your computer or your phone or your television or the newspaper, you're just being sent the same message over and over and over again. And that message is that you are not enough. And it breaks my heart because I speak to thousands of people every month. And everywhere I go, I notice that people are believing that message. They're not just believing it, they're piling on to that message. And that is such a shame because that message is an out and out lie. You are enough. Each and every one of you out there, I feel like the teacher at Romper Room to say, I am looking and speaking to you. You are enough. If you even think about the fact that we are together in this moment, how miraculous it is. I am a former lawyer. I have studied the laws of this land that were designed to kill the Indian in the child, to solve the Indian problem. And let me tell you, they were intricate and broad sweeping laws and policies. And yet we have survived all of that. And when you think about it, think about yourself, right? Two people had to come together at a specific point in time for you to even be a thought. Then you had to survive pregnancy. Do you know what the odds are against that, against you being born? 30 trillion to 1. That's the odds against you being born. And you beat that. You were born. And look, I don't know you. So I don't know your story, right? I don't know what you've been through. I don't know what you're going through in this particular moment, but I do know you made it because you're here. So isn't that a miracle? And if that's a miracle, if you can agree with me that that's pretty miraculous, how can you possibly look in the mirror and question what you see there? Because what you see there is exactly what you're supposed to see. And you have one job, and that's to learn how to fall in love with what you see in that mirror. And what you see there is going to change over time, right? Those of you who have long-term partners, I bet your partner doesn't look the same way they did when you first met them, but you still love them. So don't look in that mirror and expect to see what you saw 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 years ago. Know that it will change, and you must love what you see there as it changes. I believe that is the greatest act of rebellion that we could ever incite. Imagine if every Indigenous person on Turtle Island engaged in a love affair with themselves. Wow, would we have defeated them in that moment? So I invite you, when this is done this evening, to take a moment and look in your own mirror and try to start that love affair. It is a sad, sad event that has brought us to this gathering that we are going to have over the next 8 weeks. But I am thankful that we are brought together. It's a rare time that we stop and really look at one another and talk about one another's mental health. And it's such an important thing to do. You know, as they always say on the airplane, put your own mask on before you try to help someone else. And there were little bodies and little lives sacrificed in order for this moment to happen in time. So I want to take time now for a moment of silence. And I am not going to say a moment of silence and do 3 seconds. I will dim my video and we will all sit in silence for a full 60 seconds and think about those who have gone before us and those who are calling out to us now. Thank you so much for taking that time to sit and think and really turn your mind to those children who never made it home, and for the survivors who are no longer with us, and also for all those children who have not been brought home yet. Now, to start this, we are going to have more of an open conversation in a few moments, but to start, I would like to call on the elder who gave us our opening prayer, Chief Robert Joseph, a survivor himself, to tell us a little bit about himself and then talk about the history of these schools and this experience of uncovering these graves. Chief Robert, over to you. Last time we did this, I know that Shelley and Chief Robert were kind of in the same place, and she ran down the hallway to say, "Dad, turn on your video." So there he is. There he is, everyone's.
I do it every time. Thank you, Candy. I was saying that I really appreciate your presence. But more than that, I really appreciate you for sharing all of your knowledge. It's so important for us to have leaders like yourself that can help us to carry forward this message that we need to tell to all Canadians. One of the pieces of literature that I have recited over and over again in the last decade is the preface of the Truth and Reconciliation Report, the summer report. So I want to recite that for you for the moment. It's really, really important, and all of you will get to understand why it's that significant. For over a century, the central goals of Canada's Aboriginal policy were to eliminate Aboriginal governments, Aboriginal rights, and to terminate the treaties, and through a process of assimilation, cause Aboriginal people to cease to exist as distinct legal, social, cultural, religious, and racial entities in Canada. Now, when I hear those words and I read those words, it was an attempt to erase us entirely, fully, completely. The establishment and operation of residential schools were a central element of this policy, which can best be described as cultural genocide. And when I read that, it really hurts me personally every time I read it, because we were targeted to be the most effective tool for government then to assimilate us or to get rid of the Indian in us. And then it goes on to state that those states who engage in cultural genocide set out to destroy the political and social institutions of the targeted group. Land is seized, populations transferred, movements restricted, languages are banned, spiritual leaders are persecuted, spiritual practices forbidden, and objects of spiritual value are confiscated and destroyed. And most specifically to the issue at hand, families are disrupted to prevent the transmission of cultural values and identity from one generation to the next. In its dealings with Aboriginal people, Canada did all these things. And I read that, and there are actual segments of that preface remark that I witnessed in my own time. And I marvel now even more at the resilience of Indigenous people, given that I have a very good idea of what those people tried to do to us, to get rid of us completely. So I think about all of the time that these schools operated. For over 100 years, there were 130 schools, at the height of it, 130 schools all across the land. And I didn't know it. When I entered St. Michael's Residential School in 1946, I didn't know this was happening across the country, and that over time there would be 150,000 little children taken away from their homes, sometimes forcibly, to be placed in these residential schools. And I think back on my own experience now, and I think of the gravity of this initiative. It was like a tsunami. It must have been for our parents and our grandparents to have all of a sudden the children being taken away from home every year, and they would stay most times 10 months a year, and some stayed longer. And I think, oh my God, that must have been horrific for them. When I think about my own suffering and loss, I weep for my own parents and my own community. I grew up in a little place called Huayas. It's on the north end of Vancouver Island, adjacent on the mainland. And the village was on a midden. The entire site was a midden, a clamshell midden. And the village site was cradled by the forest behind it and the ocean in front of it. And one of my cousins recently, before she passed, reminded me, and they were a little bit older than me, that every year they would know when the authorities would come in a boat with the RCMP, Indian agent, and others to take them away. This was before my time. And so they would all run into the forest behind the village and climb the highest tree possible that they could find. And then they would just cling on and wait because they would know that those boats would leave sooner. And it worked, but the problem was they always came back a second time or a third time. So none of the little ones escaped being taken away from their homes, their homelands to the hideous institution called St. Michael's Indian Residential School. So when I got there, it's true they destroyed languages. When I was a little 6-year-old boy on the playground in that school, there were 7 languages, different languages of all the coastal tribes. And when we played sport and we played as teams in our tribal setting, we would be talking to each other in our own language, the other team talking to themselves in their own language. And sad to say, when I left, there was not one single person in that school that I heard speak our languages. And so it was that kind of experience. The environment was always brutal. The first years especially were the most brutal. Grades 1 and 2. I was expressing the other day that if I had only stayed 1 year in that school, the damage was complete. I was already broken, and there was absolutely no idea that there would be a future of peace and happiness and love and joy for me. I was just that sad little boy who didn't know who he was anymore, didn't know that people loved him, and didn't know that there could be better things ahead. Those were all taken away. And my memories in that school were all about the brutality of that environment. In grade 1, for instance, it was constant. We were dragged around by the ear. I was dragged around by the ear or by the hair or cuffed on the ears or strapped with a pointer or ruler, anything at hand. And we were made to stand in corners for long periods of time. And the berating never ended. The humiliation never ended. The racial put-downs never ended. So it was a complete job of breaking down one's identity. And when you're a little boy and you learn from that start, you're not going to likely grow up to be anything you'd be proud of. As a matter of fact, you do the opposite. You spiral down the road of anger and rage and dysfunction and all of those things that come with it. And the other point that I remember was the last day I was in that school. It was graduation, so-called graduation. And we were so happy. Those of us who were going to graduate, we knew that we would be leaving forever this place, St. Michael's School. And so we thought that would be an awfully good time to celebrate. Most times we thought any kind of celebration was a good time. And by celebrating, I meant that we went out on a big party, right? So we got to the banquet and ceremonies, and that's about all I remembered. And that was a Friday night. We got into the booze really heavy. And I don't know where it was, Saturday or Sunday. But on Monday morning, I woke up in a strange house and I thought I better get back to the school. I walked back to St. Michael's School, picked up my meager belongings, and was ready to leave. The principal called me and said he wanted to talk to me. And he said, you and I have had a lot of problems, but I think for what it's worth, he said, you're going to make it. And that was so, I was so upset at that comment. Why didn't he encourage me when I was growing up there? He was there for most of the years I was there. Instead, he had strapped me buck naked in front of the entire school, isolated me, quarantined me, fed me bread and water on the weekends. And then he had the gall to say, in spite of our relationship, I think you're going to make it. But anyway, I said, thank you. I didn't lose it. I picked up my bag and walked out of his office, walked out the front door, and I stood out and I was looking over the ocean, and it hit me that I had absolutely nowhere to go. I had no dreams, no sense of value or purpose. And the despondency just swept over me. And I left that place feeling that way for a very, very long time. And that was my last day in school, of course, but there have been things I've done after that that relate to that school. I facilitated the tearing down of that school, which was sort of an act of triumph for me in some ways. And we tore that school down with great celebration, some sadness, some joy, and we're able to move forward. And the place that that school used to sit on is now a beautiful green little park. And there's no blight, no shadow over the land anymore where that school was. And so I'm just saying that to say to all of us, to all of the former students of residential schools, that there always is hope, always, always. And we found the strength and the resilience to be able to do that and to say that because of our experience. So we have to find some redemption in all of it. And the only way to do that is to rediscover ourselves and make fit for a purpose that the Creator intended for us. So when I worked for the Indian Residential School Survivors Project, they had a lot of good material about some of the impacts of the experience of residential schools. And I'm just going to go over just a few so that you hear them. And an impact is defined as an impinging or striking, especially of one body against another, a forceful contact or collision, the force of impression of one thing on another. There were always aggressive removal of children from their birth families and birth communities, just like that story I told you about. They were brought to large multi-story buildings that were unfamiliar, and that was true for me when I first ever laid eyes on St. Michael's School. It was a 3-4 story brick building. I got really scared. I had no idea what was behind those walls. And of course, the first man I met was the principal, who spoke a strange language that I didn't understand at all. They separated siblings from each other. When I got there the first day, they cropped my hair, shaved all my hair off, and took away all my belongings. Every year when I went to school, back to that school, I'd have a set of new clothes, set of new runners, and they would take that away and we'd never see them again. The other thing I was really sad about it was that we were always referred to by number, not by Robert or Bobby Joe or anything like that. And it was difficult to communicate with other kids. I mentioned there were 7 dialects on the ground, different languages. So we couldn't communicate at first, all of those little ones who got there. But we recognized our difference, and that was good. The food was always bad, always malnutritious. I got some sad stories about food. And physically, mentally, emotionally, spiritually, sexually, there was a lot of violation of those things. It's true. Those things really, really did happen. We weren't allowed to communicate with our siblings. Sometimes we didn't see our parents for months and months on end. And so we were removed very far from our culture and traditions. And those were some of the things that happened to us. So the effects of those, that treatment became evident in high suicide rates high rates of school dropout, high unemployment, lateral violence, child abuse, mental health problems, physical health problems, medical health problems, diabetes, high cholesterol, heart conditions, and I got all of that, by the way. Unresolved anger and misdirected anger. I was angry for a really long time in my life, and I couldn't understand it. I wanted to, and I didn't want to be angry. And it took a long time to get past that. And as a consequence, my family, my children, my wife suffered, and it served no useful purpose at all. And so all of those things happened in those schools. They're real, they're true. And you can see across the board in our communities, the residual impacts of those residential schools. I think they were the worst thing that ever happened in this country, period. They're the worst thing that ever happened to any human being in this country, period. And they never should have been done, but it's done. And so I'm saying to all of us now that we need all of the strength, all of the resilience, all of the love, and all of us together now, Indigenous, non-Indigenous, government, industry, everybody working together to bring about something better than the condition that we've always been used to. So I'll close my comments on that.
Thank you so much, my friend, for sharing such personal and deep and traumatic memories for the purpose of setting us on the path to these discussions. From the bottom of my heart, I appreciate it. And I know all these participants appreciate it as well. It's a good way to get us started on tonight's discussion. I now want to turn the floor over to Karen Joseph. Who's going to talk a bit about how we got here and an honest look at our history. And then we'll engage in a panelist conversation.
Thank you for that, Candy. Thank you, Dad, for sharing that with all of us. You know, one of the things that happened during the Truth and Reconciliation Commission was all of the people sharing their stories. And when that happens, we have to be careful about ensuring that we're taking care of ourselves, that we're doing groundings, that we're making sure that we can be present, but also be safe. And so I really want to remind people about that. If there are things here that trigger you, we know, given what's going on in our communities, that unfortunately the severity of our lives is difficult to hear. And it's, for some of us who are Indigenous, it's difficult to hear it again. And for those people who are further away from us in mainstream society, it may be the first time that you're hearing it. And so I really want to acknowledge the difficulties that can pose to individuals. How did we get here? Wow, that's a really loaded question. I think one of the things that always challenges me when we're doing the work of dialogue around Reconciliation Canada, and you know, we've reached over now probably 2.5 million, almost 3 million people around the world. And so some of the things that we talk about or hear are this idea of not really believing that things happened, or that things happened to the extreme that they did. And I think that's one of the horrors that people are finally understanding with the unearthing of these children, and of so many of them. But for the first time, we're realizing the breadth of injury that were posed, because there were other children that had also passed that were acknowledged. And yet these are the ones that are not documented anywhere. And so, Dr. Peter Bryce did a report in 1920 saying that, over half of the children that were going into these institutions were dying there. And so this idea of kill the Indian and the child obviously was effective in one way and not very effective in another way, because it actually ended up killing many of our children. And people knew it. That's the thing, that lots of people try to kind of deny what's going on, in the sense that, oh, no, people were really trying to do the right thing. They were trying to do good things. But these numbers that Dr. Peter Bryce shared in 1920 were distributed. He was the health officer, the medical health officer for the Department of Indian Affairs. And he shared that internally, and it was quieted. And actually in 1924, after everybody had heard that and received it, the government decided that they would make it illegal for anybody not to send their children. And so if your children were hiding, or if they weren't coming in and they knew that you had children, then you would be subject to jail. And then your children would still be taken away from you. So you'll hear oftentimes of these kids not understanding the silence of their parents, because the parents know what's happening and they're absolutely helpless to do anything about it. And that, for me, as somebody who is a parent, to think about having to do that, and to thinking about the impact that would have on me, let alone the impact that it's going to have on the person who's going into those schools, how that would reverberate within our communities. And then I always talk about the children that are in there. My father sort of shares bits and pieces of his story that we need to understand kind of the kind of individuals that will emerge from that space. I mean, you just think about it. There is no touch in there other than that which is violence, or either physical violence or sexual violence for the duration of your time there. No touch other than that. And so what kind of person is going to emerge from that? And how are you going to establish relationships? One of the actual purposes of those institutions was to ensure that our men learned corporal punishment because our women spoke too much, and because our children had too much freedom. And so they wanted to emulate what was going on in mainstream society, so that we might be able to potentially enter into the lower echelons of Canadian society. And and all of this is the really, really critical piece. All of this was so that Canada could establish a viable economy, so that Canadians would be able to earn a living, that people would be able to create wealth from the resources that were on the land as well as from the people. So those are really, really important conversations, especially as we're looking at today, all of the determinants of health, all of the gaps of where Indigenous people are on any of the metrics that we're talking about are as a result of that. And so one of the things that challenges me with this conversation that we're having is that people seem to put it in the past, when in fact it is still going today. We still have the majority of our children being placed into care, being removed from their families forcibly, not because of any abuse, but mostly because of neglect or an inability to be able to provide what's considered appropriate housing or food or those kinds of things. It's not actually because of abuse. The standard by which Indigenous children are removed is much, much lower than it is for any other population in this country. For anybody else to have their children removed today, it actually requires physical violence. And so this continues. Think about our incarceration rates, you think about anything that affects us today, this continues. And it is all fundamentally based on that economy and wanting to make sure that the rest of the population, Canada, is able to be viable internationally. And so that's a really important part of this conversation that, you know, I'm looking forward to having more dialogue around, especially with the panelists that have joined us today. Because I think for me, that's a really important path forward. Where do we go from here? How do we make sure that that part of that wealth that's being created out of the territories that have been forcibly removed from us, that there is some kind of reciprocity, and also recognizing, you know, the different ways Indigenous people look at wealth, the different ways that we look at relationships as a result of all of this loss, as a result of our cultures. You know, for us, somebody is considered wealthy if they're able to provide for a larger number of people. And so whereas within mainstream society, wealth is really determined by how much you can accumulate, not how much you take care of everybody else, but, you know, those with the most toys wins is sort of the thing that I used to hear when I was younger. And so it's a very different value system. And also, you know, this idea of the impact that we're having on other people, that's what all my relations is about. That's what Nunwayut is about. I am responsible for the impact that I have on you. And so I must act in the highest manner possible in order to ensure that the impact that I'm having is one that is going to be beneficial for all of us. So I'm gonna close it there, because I think that, you know, it leaves us a lot of places in which to join this conversation, and it allows for, I think, lots of questions and opportunities for dialogue. So thank you, Candy.
Thank you so much for that, Karen. I just want to take a moment. I know that some of you are watching on Zoom, some of you are watching on Facebook Live, and I know that these discussions can be triggering. I want to advise caution. If you are in the comments on Facebook or any of these places, the general public can get in there, and the general public, unfortunately, on the internet is just, you know, peppered with trolls who want nothing more than to hurt. So anyone who is really triggered right now is looking for support. There was a link put in the comments for the Reconciliation Canada resources. I will also tell you that the Indian Residential School Survivor Society, their helpline is 1-800-721-0066. That's 1-800-721-0066. And I know that there was a question on Facebook about how can we get help and what support can we provide. As we enter now into this conversation, and particularly over the next 8 weeks, it won't all happen tonight, we are going to make call outs of things that we think people should do to help support what is happening. So at this point, I am going to ask tonight's panelists to enable their videos and to unmute themselves. And those panelists, we're supposed to have Terrelyn Fern here, but I'm not sure if she made it or not. We also have Andrea Nempton, Chief Robert Joseph, and Karen Joseph. If you could activate your videos and and unmute yourselves. And for those of you watching, there won't be an official question and answer period at the end, but I am facilitating and I'm watching both the chat and the Q&A. I'm going to tell you, it's better for me if you go in the chat. If you have a question, and I can then vocalize that question to the panelists. I won't get to them all. And I would really invite you to really listen, not spend all your time typing, but to really listen to the contributions. Karen, how are you doing there? Are you with us? Karen is still muted. Can someone check on Karen? Karen.
That's
There we go.
how you know I'm
There
my
we-
father's daughter, right?
I love it. I love it. And I don't think Tara Lynn. Is, oh, now, there's going to be a bit of a feedback because I think Karen, you don't have buds in. Maybe I'm not sure. I'm hearing myself feedback, and it's no big deal. I'm going to not talk as much. You guys are going to do all the talking, so that's going to be quite all right. And here's the question that I want to throw out to start the conversation. Now, I've been talked to a lot over the last couple of weeks. I do a lot of national television. I've been asked a lot, what should people do? I have a pretty straightforward answer. I just feel that us being 6 to 7% of the population, politicians are never going to listen to us because they respond to their electorate. Because as Karen said, it's all about money. And for politicians, people, their electorate means money. So I say the rest of Canada, the other 94, 93, 94% have to get involved. I want to see Canadians, putting up roadblocks. I want to see all the investment bankers here in downtown Toronto say to the government, we're going to put our taxes in a trust account this year, and we're not going to release them to you until every First Nation has water. Imagine if Ted Rogers decided to say to the government, until you put water in all the First Nations, I'm not playing ball anymore. Can you imagine this whole country would come to a halt? So we need others to get involved. But what really shocked me over the last 3 to 4 weeks, we had the apology over 10 years ago now. We had the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. We had the Commission on Murdered and Missing Aboriginal Women and Girls. We have been saying for ages, there have been books written, there have been interviews given about the number of children that died. And yet, Canada was so shocked. Every program I'm on, people talk about the shock. I would like to open this discussion with having you chat about why it is that they just can't seem to hear it. Why it is that the rest of the country would be shocked at a time like this after the messaging has been out there for so long.
Oh, I will answer that, Candy. Thank you. And first, I just want to thank you, Chief Joseph and Karen, for bringing me here. And I've been watching the comments and just to give my respect to the survivors today. And all of you for being here. Because I wasn't shocked. I knew. And people are shocked because they don't want to know things. They don't want to know things. That you spoke earlier, Candy, about folks looking at their devices and getting their little tiny feedback loops, and our worlds are both massive and tiny right now. And somehow that has impeded our ability to feel empathy. When they talk about selling things, they talk about that sort of knowing, and first you have to learn about something, and then you feel it, and then you buy it. I think it's actually, you have to feel it before you can bother knowing and then acting. I just want to say that, I want to apologize on behalf of as many settlers as I can represent to all of you here today. And we need to make it right, Kenny. You're absolutely right. Unfortunately, investment bankers, I don't think actually pay any taxes. I think
You
it's
don't pay as much as I do, that's for sure.
they do. I think that, and so and Robert Jessup, I just want to take a minute to honor this man who every time I have ever seen him, he has expressed love to others after that history. I mean, you amaze me in your resilience and your goodness. And Candy, I want to hear from Robert and Karen about how we turn this around, what actions we need, how we make this right, how people are going to stand up. Because for me, I think we individually have to decide who we want to be, what kind of communities we want to live in, and what we want to be as a nation. And especially, as you all say, coming up to Canada Day. If we look back on our history, the reason we are Canada and not the United States is because of Tecumseh and his indigenous, folks that helped to beat the Americans back on the border. They saved our ass. You saved our ass.
It's a great point you make about what kind of person do we want to be. I come from a place of great privilege because I was raised in a home with both my parents, and it was a sober and a drug-free home, and I was enveloped in love. And I know that sets me apart so drastically. But my parents said to me when I was very young, we don't care what you're going to do for a living. Dig a ditch, fly a rocket to the moon. We don't care. That's your life to lead. We're not going to try to live our lives through you. But they said, what kind of human being you're going to be, that we care about because that's our work. So they told me to always picture the person that I want to become. And every choice I make in my life, to ask myself, is that moving me closer or further away to from that person? And that's how I really navigated my life. It's why I left the law, because I couldn't even see her anymore when I was in that realm. So I want you, Chief and Karen, to talk a little bit about that, about where we're going forward, about what it is that the country needs to do right now.
You want to go first, Karen?
Here, I thought you were going to say something. Wow, Candy, that's a huge question. I don't think too many people really think about that, where they want to be in this society. We don't. I think that's one of the beauties of us. You can find a silver lining in any situation. One of the things that's a silver lining for us is we have so much loss. That loss happens from the time we are children, and it just compounds as you get older. And the beauty of that is that we know how to love when we're with people. We know how to deeply connect with people really quickly. Like, people are always surprised about that in terms of who I am anyway, because it's like, I don't have time to play. I don't have time to waste in light conversations or those kinds of things. If I love and care for somebody, I need them to know that. And I need to have those quality time, those quality moments with them, because we never know what's going to come next. And I remember, when I remember being in a situation where this horrific, I was in school and I was in a professional program, and I was sitting there and I was in tears because I was listening to this person share their story, and it was heartbreaking. And one of my classmates behind me was on his phone, a Caucasian guy. He literally looks up off of his phone and says, what the bleep is this bleep talking about? I need to check my stocks right now, because the stocks were slipping in that moment.
Mm.
And it's like, wow. So when you talk about being in situations, being in professional situations where the values are so like just, it's like shocking and it's soul killing, and we go into these professions as Indigenous people because we want to make a difference.
Mm.
We spend our lives finding a way to live our purpose. And I think in that sense, it's a real blessing too. We don't have time to kind of play around because there's too much loss, right? It's like, and so I think that would be a really important conversation for people to have is, what are your relationships like? How significant are they? There's been so many times where I've heard about people that grew up with Indigenous people. And they always say, well, yeah, I had these Indigenous friends. and my first question, the best question that I always have is, did you ever go to their house?
Yeah.
Did you ever go to their house? Because if you didn't go to their house, you weren't their friend.
Yep.
It's like, because the only people that ever come to your house are the ones that can handle that situation, right? And then you're being polite, and you may think kindly of them and not any disdain, but you're not going to invite them to your house, right? It's that belly laugh in the mind of all of these things. So there's all kinds of places that we have resilience. And I think the beauty of reconciliation is figuring out how do we weave those resiliences together, right? In terms of, financial stability, in terms of, it's just like when you're working. If there's something you don't know how to do, you don't have to figure out how to do it. Just find somebody else who can do it and work with them. And then, you'll get further along in your project or whatever it is. I think for me, people need to think about that. People need to think about, okay, what are you good at and where can you contribute? Because this is the other thing that really frustrates me about reconciliation. People keep thinking it's an Indigenous issue. It's not an Indigenous issue. We didn't create these laws. We didn't create these policies. We didn't put these kids in school. We didn't take these children away. None of that was done by Indigenous people. That was all the Canadian government, who Canadians elect, and the churches who are represented by their congregations, and the police who were responsible for removing those children and putting them into those schools. Like, this is we're not the problem. We are not the problem. And so how are people going to respond? How are people going to accept responsibility for that? Like, you can't change. We're never going to change this country unless people start acknowledging, A, I benefit from it.
Yes.
B, I'm responsible because I'm the one doing the electing, and most, anyway, I can go on and on and on. So I'm going to leave it there. But I do think that those are important challenges for people to think about. How do you want to show up today? That's Namuyu in a nutshell, right? How am I going to show up in my relationship to you? Because you are important to me. And as is the planet, right? It goes into all aspects of who we are. So
It's such an important point, because I think a lot of people struggle with that notion of I benefit. Like, people don't seem to be able to get their head around privilege. And there's a great ally who wrote 2 incredible books. Her name's Anne Bishop. And I was in a room once when Anne said, I farm land that was stolen twice, first from the Mi'kmaq and then from the Acadians. I still benefit, therefore I owe. And it was such a powerful statement in a room full of non-Indigenous people for her to lay that out there. And the other thing that you said before I let your dad weigh in is, I loved when you said, what do I have and how can it serve? When Stephen Harper signed the apology, the Atlantic Policy Congress called me. It was at the very beginning of my comedy career. And they said, we're having all the Atlantic Canadian survivors come together for 3 days. And in that time, they're going to have to recount everything that has happened to them to figure out the scheme of compensation. We don't want to send them home raw. So we'd like you to come in on the third night and do comedy before they go home. And I thought, I appreciate the call, but I don't think that's a fit. Thanks anyway. Maybe get singers or something. And I hung up. And then one of the elders called me and she said, listen here, Missy. Humor is how we have healed for generations.
Yes.
And little girl, if that is the gift you were given, then that is what you owe us. And when an elder tells you that, you put your stuff in the car and you drive to Moncton. And I did this set. And at the end of the set, I said, hey, instead of applauding the comedy, could all of us in the room acknowledge the survivors? There were about 500 people in the room, big thunderous applause. And then one by one, they were coming up to me and they were saying, and it just happened organically, oh, I'm your fan. I watch you all the time. You know, I love you. And then they'd hug me. And when they hugged me, they whispered in my ear how long they had done. Like I was 11 years at Shuby. I was 7 years at Shuby. And it was just one after the other after the other. And when I got in the car, I cried from Moncton all the way back to Halifax. But when I was laying in bed with my wife that night, I said, you know, tonight I learned how serious this funny business is. And from that moment on, I looked at comedy as medicine, as something that I could offer up humbly to my community. So I just love that you talked about that, because no matter who you are, you have something. And you have something that you can offer up. So I really appreciated that. Those were really great points.
I
And
just
now-
want to jump in, Candy.
Yes.
I think one of the outcomes I really want to see as a result of these podcasts is the idea that Canadians, ordinary Canadians, all people, realize that reconciliation will happen if they all engage. It's not going to happen if we leave it strictly to the politicians and the churches and official representatives. They all respond to the kind of conscience that we have as ordinary Canadians. So until we begin to demonstrate that conscience to them so that they can live by it, we will be struggling with the advancement of reconciliation for a long time. So I'm saying to all Canadians, please get engaged. I think what you have to do to begin is to adopt reconciliation as a core value. Every day when you wake up throughout the course of the day, your last thought for the night, think about reconciliation as a core value. And when you've made that a reality, begin to think about creating your own individual reconciliation action plan. We call them back pocket action plans. And if we can roll out reconciliation from the core of our individual selves, it's going to snowball across the country, throughout the populace, and politicians who have not been listening are going to begin to understand that they either need to listen or they're not going to get reelected again, right? And I'm not saying that they haven't done anything. They've done everything they can within the context of what's politically expedient for them. But if they know that this country, all Canadians, caring, compassionate, ordinary Canadians want a change and a real shift about how we see and hear and treat each other, our politicians will eventually respond. So that's my first dream. The second dream then is that those same governments that fund specific target groups right now should fund a process of societal reconciliation, allowing communities to get together, to have dialogue, to create meaning between each other that will shift, transform their relationship. I think that's a really important element of reconciliation that has not been given any consideration at all.
I love that as we were talking, a non-Indigenous person put in the comments, first of all, thanking us, saying that she loves being here and learning, and that she said she asked Creator for one Indigenous friend. And when that friend came into her life, that's when her reconciliation started. And it made me think of Wanda Sykes, the great American Black comedian who who in her last comedy special said, if you don't have a Black friend, you're part of the problem. So I thought that was lovely. And this woman also brought up a really great point where she said, non-Indigenous people they grasp too tightly to comfort. They want to fix this without ever feeling discomfort. And I think you hit something on the head there. And I want to address two things you said, because I see you refer to yourself as a settler, and I know a lot of people do that. I'm big into semantics. If you look up the definition of settler is when people come from another land and they come to an unpopulated territory in which there is no social structure and no culture, and they then establish a community. That is not what happened. People came, I call them newcomers. Anybody who refers himself as a settler, I say you're a newcomer, because you came to a land where there was a structured society, and there was culture, and there was a societal fabric. So even in the semantics of the words, I just think it's so important to keep that in mind, because I remember saying to my history teacher, either those Vietnamese people who are coming in boats right now, this was in the 80s, are settlers, or they were British boat people, but you can't have it two different ways, right? Mm-hmm. Newcomers are newcomers. So when she raised this thing about comfort, and I say this all the time, you know, I value a healthy lifestyle. I could show you my gym membership. It's pristine. I've never swiped it, right? So I can value that all I want. But if I'm really going to get healthy, it's going to be uncomfortable. There's going to be some sweat and some tears and some stiffness. And we have to get to that spot. Can you all just talk a little bit about that notion of discomfort and how you think Canadians are going to find a place to it where they can understand that this is not going to be an easy process, that they are going to have to feel uncomfortable?
I have ideas about that. I want to let Karen or Chief Joseph speak first if they want to jump in, but no, I see a nodding of the head.
Oh no, I'm good. I can jump in. Yeah, I'm going because, well, I mean, you know, any change is hard. Any change is hard. We don't change what we're doing because life is going great. You know, we change because we've hit something and we don't like the way it feels. And so in order to change that, you got to do something different. And it doesn't matter what it is, whether it's like you're talking to your partner. I mean, the way I see reconciliation is like a relationship. We are in relationship with one another, whether we like it or not. Nobody's going anywhere. And what we're teaching our children right now is this othering piece, right? Othering is not the same as reconciliation. Acknowledging differences is not the same as othering, right? I really appreciate what you're talking about with the newcomers, Candy. It always sort of grates me when I hear that, because I'm like, oh. But you know, but change itself, you can't understand this. You can't hear those stories. Number one, you need to know what happened so that you can't be in denial anymore. We're not going to get anywhere if we can't acknowledge that something really, really terrible went wrong. And if you actually figure out what went wrong, you'd have to be not human to feel and to be discomforted with that. But what I really appreciated what Andrea said the other day, which is we don't have time for guilt and we don't have time for shame.
Yep.
Because that leaves us in inaction. What we do have time for is regret. I don't like the way this happened, and I'm going to do something about it, and I'm going to make it happen. And that is what reconciliation is about. Because shame is a natural feeling, but it's a place of stagnancy. You know, you need to do something different. And sorry.
Not about those that were impacted, right? You know, yeah. Shame is about me. It's not about those who are being impacted. It's self-oriented. And, you know, and I love, thank you, Kenny. You know, I've had so many Indigenous friends give me learning moments. And I just had one, and thank you. My grandparents were immigrants, and they traded with the Indigenous folks in their neighborhood. They were tanners, and they were saved and helped. And so they were newcomers. They were immigrants, not settlers. So I love that. Thank you. I'll move that on. And, you know, I think that Canadians have to understand we have a pride about being nice. We have a pride about being just. We've been told that we're multicultural. We have a Bill of Rights. We are equitable. And we have committed genocide, and we continue to. So that's it, folks. Like, do we want to stop this or not?
Yeah, pretending it doesn't exist, doesn't change it.
Level, right? 50% of the kids in jail, that's not because they're bad.
Yeah.
50% of the kids in care are Indigenous. That's not because their parents are bad. This is on us. It's not on them. So societally, systemically, we need to stand up. We want to be part of the resistance or not? Whose side do you want to be on? That's it. And as individuals, yeah, get some good friends. Be a good friend.
That's the surprising thing about reconciliation. I actually never use the word resistance, because I'm like, it's like somebody threw you in a whitewater rapids. You know, the momentum in reconciliation, if you're actually doing the work, is like so strong. And man, you know, you got to figure out how to stay alive and all of that. But yeah, it's amazing. The people that you meet in this movement, the number of people, because I did not come to reconciliation thinking that this was a good thing. I came kicking and screaming, and at the specific request of my father. And the only reason why he sort of teased me into the place was, oh, I really need your help with this. So as soon as he says that, you can't say no. And, you know, and then he kept asking me for help. And then I started realizing, you know, because I had that other professional experience, that there are a tremendous amount of amazing people in this process of reconciliation that are all trying to sort it out and bumping heads and falling down and getting back up, and everybody's like moving, right? So yeah, thank you.
Yeah. You know, and it's
Sorry, Dad. Chief Joseph.
I just want to make a really brief comment, and I made it part of it the other day, that reconciliation starts with self. And if we don't grow it out from there, from yourself, myself, themselves, ourselves, we self, if we don't grow it out from there, it's not likely that we're ever going to have enough power of love and persuasion and acceptance and open-mindedness, good hearts, good minds to really make progress. We would end up making legal agreements, political agreements, but agreements from the heart that we can then kind of roll up and say are sort of spiritual agreements. That's the kind of covenant we want to reach. And that's why we want all Canadians to be involved, because we won't reach that high covenant unless all of us are involved. We've seen over the last few hundred years how easy it is to break promises and treaties and other agreements that have been made before. And they're all subject to wind and whim and politics. But if we do this right and we engage with each other, and it's meaningful to all of us, we have this covenant that I think can be achieved, that won't be broken, that we will always be guided by and held to our highest selves, to our highest consciousness. So I think it's really important to remember that reconciliation starts with you, the same as love. If you know that you love yourself, you can begin to love others. It's the same principle in reconciliation, I think.
and
I love in the chat here. I'm just going to jump into the chat and I'll come back to you. Someone came in who said, I'm a first generation newcomer and talked about the experience of recent immigrants, particularly from nations that are war-torn, Syria, Palestine, Iraq, and they talked about how they really have a deep understanding of reconciliation. And as a Mi'kmaq person on the East Coast, we were the first to come in contact with the newcomers. So whenever I hear people being racist about recent newcomers, I'm always saying, listen, 450 years ago, we established the immigration policy, act accordingly. It's not your house to say you're not welcome in. All are welcome. That is what we said. That is what we continue to say. So I'm so happy to see that you're here on this lead as well, on this feed. And I want to let people know, just before we get back to the panelists, right when this Zoom ends, I will say thank you and good night. Stay on the line for a few minutes if you want some resources, because a few slides are going to be put up with some resources there. So if you want to see those, just take a moment to take it to look and see what's going to be put up. Andrea, sorry, I cut you off. You were going to say something.
I just want to encourage people to share what they're going to do. I mean, what we've heard here is that everyone has something that they can do. Reconciliation is also practice. Like, I'm still an amateur. I'm still learning. I've been, really deeply engaged since 2013, and it's a journey. It's a lifelong practice, just as my spirituality. And so we're all practicing. And share what you're doing. It will come back to you. Write it in the chat, what you want to do tomorrow, what you want to do the next day, where you want to share your energy to have a positive impact on others, on your community, and on this country.
I want to thank the three of you for this conversation. I wish we were doing it with cups of tea in person in a room together, but that day will come. And we are going to have a song to kind of bring the evening to a close. But Karen wants to say something first.
I have an ask. So as an act of reconciliation, there's a couple of things I would very much like. Number one, yes, please wear an orange t-shirt on Canada Day. Wear an orange t-shirt on Canada Day. We need to understand the history of this country. I think that's a great way to have people reflect. The other thing is, can you please share this with at least 4 friends? Share this video with at least 4 friends and tweet it out. Ask people to watch this and follow up with them to make sure that they have. That's how we're going to get this message out here. The beautiful thing about reconciliation is once you start on the journey and you start living your actual values, because that's the other thing I found out in my whitewater rafting, is that we all have the same values. And when you start living those values and making taking the next step, the next best right step, then you get to that nakakala, which is peace within. And ultimately that's it. The spiritual conundrums that we're in, all of those kinds of challenges, there's clarity that comes through that. And so I'm so grateful that everybody's here listening to us and challenging how they're thinking and how they're showing up. It's really important.
Such a great challenge. And if you follow Reconciliation Canada on Instagram or Facebook, you will see the links for these events as they roll out over the next 8 weeks. You can find me at the Candy Show on all the social media platforms. I'll be posting them as well. And what a great idea to also share with your friends that this is happening on Saturday, and join us for the conversation on Saturday. That can be your first step towards reconciliation, which is an amazing thing. This is a family affair. So we have father and daughter, and there is another daughter in the wings that is going to sing us to the end. And I have a special joy with that daughter because I am the youngest of 7 in my family by a lot. My older siblings are 20 years older than me. My father was an alcoholic, and they had their first 6 kids in alcoholism and poverty. And my dad got sober. I'm always proud to say that when he died 51 years sober. And when he got sober, he asked my mother to have one more baby. And she was like, she had 6 grown kids, gray hair. She was in her 40s. She said, okay. I was 11 pounds and 24 inches. She rethought that choice. But as a result,
See,
they all call me the baby. And this beautiful woman who's about to sing for us in her family is the baby. So known to those who love her as baby, known to the rest of the world as the beautiful, beautiful voice of Shelley Joseph to sing us our song for the night.
Thank you so much, baby.
Way to go, baby.
I've truly enjoyed, and I always do, listening to these conversations about reconciliation. How do we move forward here together in Canada? And my answer is always so boldly with love. That's how we move forward. And to be courageous to a next level that we've never stepped into yet here in Canada. My dad has always said, reconciliation isn't for the weak. You have to have a huge level of courage to step into this, conviction, belief, humanity, all of those great things. But most of all, love. I'm sitting with my firstborn. This is Quinqualasu Wilauk. And as beautiful as my voice is, hers is about 10 times that. So this evening, we want to encourage you and leave you with that notion that the bottom line is love. Love yourself, love one another boldly. And it's going to be uncomfortable. And that's okay. It has to get uncomfortable or nothing changes. So we're going to sing you a love song that comes from my grandfather, her great grandfather. This is a love song from Tsahis, or the Kwagyos people. Right? Yeah. So big is my love for all of you.
That was beautiful. That's like singing me to sleep for tonight. It's late here in Toronto, and I really appreciated that. Thank you so much. I want to remind everyone, if you stay on once I'm done talking here, you'll see a couple of slides with some resources. I remind you of Karen's challenge to you all. Share this with 4 people. Join us on Saturday with 4 friends. Go to the Reconciliation Canada website or any of their social platforms to get biographical information about the panelists you heard tonight, or information about how to link in on Saturday and in the weeks to come. Thank you very much. And I will reiterate what everyone else said. Love yourselves, love one another, and stay safe out there. I'm Candy Palmater. It's been my pleasure to be your moderator. Good night.